would like to correct one of the statements made by our colleague on the other side about who actually pays the income taxes in this country. The top 10% of earners bore responsibility for 76% of all income taxes paid, and the top 25% paid 89% of all income taxes. Altogether, the top 50% of filers earned 90% of all income and were responsible for 98% of all income taxes paid in 2021. It's very clear that the people who earn the majority of the money are also the ones that are responsible for paying the income taxes in this country. The fiscal year 2025 national debt currently stands at around $1.78 trillion. That's what I was looking at just this morning, and the national debt is at $38 trillion and counting. In 2010, when I first started really kind of ringing the bell about the debt and deficit, the debt was $10 trillion. So we've added another 28, almost $30 trillion just in the last 15 years. The U.S. now spends 13% of its budget on interest on the national debt and more than current annual spending on Medicare or the national defense. Mr. Walker, understanding that the successful adoption of a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution would inevitably help rein in future annual spending, factoring in our existing deficit and debt, I believe, merits some additional attention. With our deficit just shy of the $2 trillion, how would the implementation of a balanced budget amendment need to approach this growing figure? What would we do with that growing figure with the deficit?
Well, first, I believe that the debt to GDP is too high right now in order to promote future economic growth, individual opportunity, et cetera. And so I think you need to do two things. One, you need to limit how much debt as a percentage of the economy the country can take on absent limited and extraordinary circumstances, a credit card limit, all right? And then secondly, let's set a target for a lower debt to GDP that we want to get to in 10 to 15 years and have mechanisms that can get us there, if you will. The American people know that we have a problem here. Mm-hmm. They support that approach that I just articulated. And in addition to that, they recognize the problem is both spending and revenue. And when you look at it, you have to look at it as a percentage of GDP. What percentage of spending to GDP, what percentage of revenue? And the American people support a 3-to-1 ratio. 3 parts projected spending reduction to 1 part revenue increase, but they believe that both are necessary.
Okay. Well, should the enactment of a balanced budget amendment then provide for a transition period to achieve a balanced budget over time, or could this be done immediately?
No, it needs to have a transition, there's no question.
Do you know how long that transition should be?
I would say 10 years as a general guideline. I think Kurt Couchman has said the same.
So you also talked about exceptions. The COVID-19 so-called public health emergency was initiated by HHS in January 2020. It was renewed 12 times, and it finally expired in May of 2023. The COVID-19 national emergency was initiated in March 2020 and terminated in April 2023, following finally the passage of a joint resolution of Congress. And according to the Treasury Department, from fiscal year 2019 to 2021, federal spending increased by about 50% in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I believe that the Democrats spent over $5 trillion while Joe Biden was in the White House addressing some of this. According to USAspending.gov, approximately $4.7 trillion in total budgetary resources was spent in response to COVID-19. Another point for contention for a balanced budget amendment is obviously the concept of exceptions, such as spending for in times of war, national security, natural disasters, and other emergencies. Mr. Couchman, one of my concerns is how those exceptions will be defined and implemented. Do you see that there could be potential abuses, both by Congress as well as the White House, by declaring national emergencies to circumvent any kind of budget constraints that we may adopt with a balanced budget amendment?
Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And so Congress can't be content to simply pass a BBA and assume that it will fix all the problems. I once believed that. I was naive and young. And I now believe there has to be a robust suite of statutory mechanisms to help Congress exercise its legislative powers in order to check and balance itself, but also the White House, and in some cases, perhaps the Judiciary. One other quick note about balanced budget amendment design. It is critical to avoid annual balance because tying your revenue and spending together so closely when revenue is so volatile will create all kinds of problems. In fact, the way that Mr. Duke described, but there are other BBAs that don't have that problem and also don't rely on defining spending as outlays, which is when money leaves the federal government. If you define it in a general term, you can, through implementing legislation, avoid all the problems that Mr. Duke talked about with respect to business cycles and automatic stabilizers.
And have you identified those and written them down?
Yes, ma'am, and they have, a big piece of that has been introduced as legislation by Representative Tom Emmer and then Senator Mike Braun.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady from Wyoming. I will now recognize the gentlelady from